Warning: the following podcast might be too truthful for most liberals. Listener discretion is therefore advised.
Welcome to the Tea Party Power Hour. I am your host, Mark Galar, and I am very excited today to have two guests who've written a book entitled NextGen Marxism. The authors are Mike Gonzalez. He is the Angeles T. Arredondo Senior Fellow on E Pluribus Unum at the Heritage Foundation, and you spent close to 20 years in journalism, with 15 of that being reporting from Europe, Asia, and Latin America. KATHARINE Gorka is the director for formerly served as the director for civil society at the Heritage Foundation. She also worked as a president appointee in the Office of Policy at the Department of Homeland Security, and also was the president of the Threat Knowledge Group from 2014 to 2017, and provided expertise and training on irregular warfare and terrorism to the FBI. KATHARINE, Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much. Great to be here. Yep.
You guys have written a very important book called NextGen Marxism, what it is and how to combat it. So let's start with what it is. You guys can take turns, jump in however you want. My question to begin with is, how do we differentiate NextGen Marxism from traditional Karl Marxism or Soviet Marxism?
You want to take that, Kate, or you want me to start?
Go for it.
Well, the way Katie and I structure the book is by explaining the genesis of next-gen Marxism. It's really kind of, if we simplified, a third iteration of Marxism. Marxism starts with Karl Marx, obviously, the Communist Manifesto of 1848, very economically determinist. He says that revolutions will be happening constantly because the worker's going to rebel and overthrow the bourgeois and kill him and destroy his family. And then that doesn't happen for 70 years until 1917. And when it happens, it contradicts a lot of Marxist dictums. So when West Europeans try to have the same thing, try to have a 1917 style revolution, they fail, and they believe they realize that culture matters too. You know, Marx had said that that the pace of revolution will be dictated by changes in the material forces of production. And then Antonio Gramsci in the 1920s, probably the most important quote for Marxist, says, well, popular beliefs and ideas are also material forces. So that's a quote. That's a verbatim quote. That idea that culture matters and that communists need to infiltrate institutions and indoctrinate people flowers in the United States in the 60s. And then when, as Katie and I write, when these 60s kids take over the institutions, especially the academy in the 80s and the 90s, they add race to that. And so that's really the next gen Marxist point in which you have all of that racialized and sexualized and going, the climate becomes another front in the war on capitalism. Now Gaza, as we see, everything Katie and I have been proven completely right. We hate to say by what's happening on campuses. And just to remember, the first material forces comes again with Eric Mann, the community organizer who recruits Patrice Couleurs. And he says racialization is also a material force. So that's in a nutshell the next gen Marxism. Katie, did I get anything wrong?
No, that was a great explanation.
So basically, communism at one point was looking at the workers and looking at the class of people and trying to turn them against one another. But now, or after, I guess, Gramsci, it was more of a, hey, we still need to stick with the theme of the oppressed and the oppressor, only it's not going to be about working class, versus the higher ups. It's going to be about anybody can be an oppressed or an oppressor. If you're gay, you're being oppressed. If you're black, or you're being oppressed. So they went out there realizing that I guess in the United States, people were happy with their lives, so they were going to have to find some other way to divide people. Is that an oversimplification, or?
No, I think that's a great way to look at it. I mean, they realized that the workers weren't going to actually bring about the revolution that Marx had predicted. But the other important thing about the Gramscian approach is that he realized you're not necessarily going to bring about the revolution through a violent overthrow. That was sort of the expectation. It didn't happen. And that's why he said, you know, part of what you need for the revolution is to change the culture. You have to change the way people think, and therefore you have to infiltrate the institutions. So yeah, but the final shifting away from the worker, I would say, in the United States really didn't happen until the 50s. There was, you know, that was kind of the birth of what was called the New Left. It really kind of, I would say, came together in the late 50s. And at that point, the belief was the revolution would be brought about by students and intellectuals, but primarily students, and it would be students working with those in the ghettos, right? That's what they said. It would be students work, you know, with people in the ghettos. And, you know, what a lot of people don't realize is that the leading radical student organization of the time, Students for a Democratic Society, they actually went into American cities and actively fomented revolution. You know, the riots that you saw in '67 were the direct result of SDS going into inner cities and really for about 3 years actively cultivating revolution. So, you know, I would say all the tricks and techniques that they learned that worked at that time, you're seeing again now reemerge with these student protests on our campuses.
Yeah, history is just replaying itself. Now, you mentioned SDS and you mentioned the 60s. In the book, you point out that there's one particular individual whose history in Marxism frankly embodies this change from physical violence to a slow march through the institutions. And you said that that individual was none other than the guy who lives in Obama's neighborhood, Bill Ayers.
He's on TV again. He's talking to the students protesting for Hamas.
Oh, great.
It's that will not go away. Yeah, no, he's perfect. He went from high school jock to founding, one of the founding members. I think he was one of the founders, right, Katie, of SDS at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. To then when SDS kind of metastasized into terrorism with the Weather Underground, he was definitely one of the founders of the Weather Underground in 1969, and he participated in terrorist acts. They were very bad at it, by the way. They were horrible terrorists.
When you blow your own self up, yeah.
yeah. His girlfriend was blown up. They found her foot in one place, you know, her knee in another, and so they went into hiding. And then when Carter came to amnesty, he came out in the early 80s, and he went to Columbia's Teachers College, got a PhD in education, and became a respectable education reformer. You know, Sol Stern said that to call Bill Ayers an education reformer is like calling Stalin an agricultural reformer. and he became a kingmaker. He introduced Barack Obama to the political world of Chicago.
Yeah.
This guy does personify this.
So was he not also, I think I read in your book, Bill Ayers, was he not also like the Illinois Person of the Year one year or something? I mean.
Sorry, can you repeat that? He was the what?
The Illinois Person of the Year one year.
I think he was something like that, yeah. I think in fact, I think Chicago or something. You know, in 1968, him and the other weathermen protested, and the other SDS people protested Mayor Daley. And then he got along greatly with Mayor Daley's son, the other Mayor Daley. So Bill Daley. So yeah, strange things happen in politics.
Yeah, it's really amazing. You can go from being a terrorist one minute to being the Illinois Person of the Year and friend of the mayor the next year. Let's take a look at this. Let's start to talk about the craziness of the 21st century. It seems to me, and I don't really fully understand it, that sex has a lot to do with Marxism. I mean, they want to redefine it. They want to get rid of the family. They want to get rid of the idea that as a person you're a man or a woman. But what is the connection? I mean, why are they sending drag queens into kindergarten classes? Why are they in favor of men who are pre-op trannies competing in women's sports? What's all this nonsense about I'm non-binary and you have to use plural pronouns when you speak to me? And why in the world are they in favor of putting books that are basically, they call it banning books, but when you look at some of the stuff that, say, DeSantis banned in Florida, we're talking books, how-to books on pedophilia, teaching young boys how to perform oral sex on grown men. This is nuttiness. I mean, they're basically not in touch with reality, or they're fighting a war against reality. I mean, what does any of this have to do with Marxism?
Yeah, this was one of the really burning questions for us. And I have to say it was one of the big motivators for us to write the book, because what happened was with the COVID shutdowns in 2020, parents started seeing some of the craziness that their kids were being taught. And this was the sort of the start of the big parent revolution, I would say. So for me, this was one of the most interesting things as I dug deeper, as Mike and I did the research on this issue. It became very apparent that the reason we have arrived to a point where the children are on the front line of this culture war is that because sex has been a dominant issue of all utopians, basically, through all time. Marx himself, and let me say this, and part of the issue is virtually every major utopian thinker, of which Marx is one, were themselves both obsessed with sex, but also very sexually deviant, unable to maintain a monogamous marriage. Marx himself was terrible, impregnated the maid, treated his children terribly, treated his wife terribly. And this carries through with a number of sort of utopians and Marxists throughout time. And part of the issue was that they understood, Marx as well as others understood, that the way you destroy the society, which was their goal, is you destroy the family. Marx is very clear about it in the Communist Manifesto. And in fact, he even says at one point that what he argues for is, instead of having a man and a woman married to each other, he just wants a community of women available to men. And then, so this becomes very handy for subsequent people who are equally kind of obsessed with sex and want to tear down sexual morality. So, it is absolutely, the two things go hand in hand. You see it in one of the leading members of the Frankfurt School who brought the Frankfurt School's ideas to Columbia University and to the United States, and that was Herbert Marcuse. Yeah. So, Mike, I don't know, you want to talk a little bit about Marcuse?
You're very, very good on this, Kate. You've also talked a lot about how, I think we never reveal who wrote which parts of the book, but I think you wrote the best parts of when you talk about the deviancy of even people like Rousseau, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Rousseau, which is sort of the philosopher where these things are founded. You probably wouldn't have Marx without Rousseau, and then in subsequent people like Wilhelm Reich and Herbert Marcuse, and then of course Michel Foucault. Sorry, that's a hard one to get out. Foucault. They all of them kind of their the things were all wrapped up together. Let's tear down society, but to do that, let's tear down the family, let's tear down sexual morality. And this is one of the reasons why I think our book is so important. I think there are parents out there who believe that they are doing the best thing for their child by supporting their so-called gender confusion. But I think if more parents understood sort of the Marxist roots of this, the evil roots of this, I think they wouldn't be so taken in by it. And I just really encourage parents, especially, to read the book and understand what is driving this really evil ideology.
Yeah, so the family is the basic unit of civic society. You know, Gramsci said that one of the reasons why communism you couldn't have revolution in Western society is because civic society was very thick in Western civilization, and the most basic unit is the family. It's pre-political, it's pre-national, it's pre-nation. It's when we were in caves, we had a family. So you tear that down, oh boy, you really can destroy society.
I mean, if you think about it, those are the two places people go when they're lost, is to the church and to the family, and Marxists want to destroy both of those. And I think it's interesting that you can have Marxists proclaim, we've got to get rid of God. We have to get rid of the family unit. Then you have Gramsci and Dutschke come along with their long, slow march through the institutions, and they openly tell you what they're going to do. And then they start doing it, and people still don't want to believe it. And it's like, don't listen to what I'm saying. Listen to what they said. I mean, they're not shy about telling you what they're all about. And I think that's the interesting thing. Now, the title of the book is NextGen Marxism, What It Is and How to Combat It. I think at this point we've done a good job of defining what it is. We're going to take a brief commercial break and be right back. And then we are going to talk about what people can do about it. Okay, we are back with Mike Gonzalez and KATHARINE Cornell Gorka. We are discussing their book, NextGen Marxism. Now, as I said just before we went to commercial break, we have done a very good job at this point. You two have done a very good job at this point of defining exactly the difference between traditional Marxism and NextGen Marxism. But the two biggest questions I get, and I'm going to take a guess that you guys might get these too, is one, how did we get here? How did all this happen? And we've already talked about that a lot. If you want anything more to it, we can. And what do I, as an individual, need to do about it? So your book, unlike a lot of books on Marxism, actually does a great job of covering the what do I do about it? I mean, it's been said if you detect a problem and all you do is complain about the problem, you're just griping. You have to actually propose a solution, and you guys do. So between the two of you, in any order that you want, talk to me about what the individual can do, because I'm sitting here myself as an individual, and I try to fight back by doing this podcast. But what can the people listening do to help fight this? Because fight this we must.
All right, I'll take a stab at that. So one of the really important pieces of the book is we talk about the fact that Marxism really failed for 70 years until Lenin came along and figured out this kind of magic formula that the way you make it work is you have to use propaganda and information to make people feel aggrieved, and then you can organize them into a revolution. And that's kind of the magic formula. And that formula really got translated for Americans by Saul Alinsky, who we're all familiar with, right? He was very, very influential, kind of, took that basic Leninist idea, but made it uniquely American. And so I think one of the first things for people who want to fight back to recognize is how important organization is, that the left really uses it. They really use creating all kinds of organizations, training people, reaching out into the grassroots to mobilize people. And so we've got to be doing the same. I mean, some of the things that people have to do to fight back are, if not easy, they are at least a little bit obvious. And that would be things like not being afraid to speak out, right? Standing up, telling the truth, saying no to things that we know are untrue. A human being cannot actually change their gender. And so that's part of it. And then, because it is difficult, finding other like-minded people is really important. But I would just say, I think the organization piece is super, super important. And we are starting to have our own organizations. I mean, I think Moms for Liberty, Moms for America, Parents Defending Education, some of these groups are really doing heroic things to fight back. But I tell you, in my time at Heritage, when I was traveling around the country working with some of the different parent groups, they are everywhere. You don't have to be, you can be part of these big national groups, but I saw hundreds of organizations in different communities that found ways to come together to fight this. And so I think that's really key. Mike, maybe you could say something more as well about, there's also a really important role for state legislators to play. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, so I completely agree with Katie. One must, as much as one can, stand up and say, as Solzhenitsyn said, and Roger said, we cannot live by lies. Live not by lies, right? You have to do all you can. Now, am I saying when I travel, I do travel extensively around the country. Sometimes people say to me, in Indiana and Ohio and Wisconsin, people say, Mr. Gonzalez, it's really easy for you to take the stances that you take, because you're not going to pay a price. Everyone knows you're a conservative already. The people who are going to abandon you for those reasons have already abandoned you, and you're not going to be fired. And that is true. And I think that that the American people who are rising up and fighting this is all these changes that have been put in the attempt at regime change that has happened since 2020, since the BLM riots, have been rejected by the American people. But the American people need help. The American people need help from their leaders, from the political leaders. They need to pass laws, and I think that this is what Katie is talking about in the different states. They're passing anti-DEI laws, especially in the red states. States like Texas and Florida have led the way here, saying, no, our universities are not going to be able to have DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion, which sounds, these are great words, right? We all want diversity, equity, and inclusion in the traditional understanding of the word, but in the way that they have been corrupted by woke ideology, they mean almost the opposite. To take only equity is the opposite of equality. It says government and the private sector must treat individual Americans differently because of their race. That is illegal. That is unconstitutional. So state governments have to stand up until help comes at the federal level, have to stand up and say, we will not do this to Americans. We will not make Americans live like the Soviets did in the Soviet Union or behind the Iron Curtain. We're going to make sure that people are free, that their constitutional rights are protected. So and states are doing that in small and large ways. They're fighting also, for example, against ESG. Many states are, and they're getting attention. There are some major banks. I just spoke to a major bank 2 weeks ago in California, and I spoke to an executive, and he said, "Look, what you guys are doing is hurting us. It's hurting the bottom line. We're turning away from ESG." This is a major bank, and an executive told me this. So this is having an effect. Obviously, much more needs to be done. This is by no means no time to take a victory lap or anything of the sort. But one has to remain optimistic in getting the fight.
Now, one of the things you touched on there, and I think it's very important, you said the way they're defining DEI, it's not a good thing. We all want those things, but they're being misleading here. And that's something that they do a lot. I mean, killing unborn babies is female reproductive health care. Young people cutting off their breasts and genitals is gender affirming health care. I mean, they always come up with some kind of a name, to some sort of a euphemism, to make it seem different than it is. I mean, it's almost a Marxist trademark, if you will, that they're never going to call anything exactly what it is. So touch on that a little bit. I mean, how do you deal with an opponent, an enemy, that engages in these types of highly misleading tactics?
Well, Black Lives Matter is a prime example of that. Black Lives Matter. When I wrote an early book about BLM, and somebody actually came to me and said, "Oh, Mike, what are you going to say when people say, Mr. Gonzalez, when you think that Black Lives Matter?" So, you have to explain all the time that Black Lives matter incredibly to me. They're my compatriots. They're Americans, just like me, and they're humans, and just like me. I care deeply about Black lives. But this is not, Black Lives Matter is not about that. Black Lives Matter is just a front set up by Marxists, by people who say they're Marxists, who say they want to change the American system. This is what it's about. This is why it needs to be combated. Just this morning, I'm a weekly columnist for the Washington Examiner, and I'm writing a column on who's funding these protests in the schools. Because Katie and I have been proven completely right. All these protesters are anti-capitalists. And so I'm looking at the Westpac Foundation, because the Westpac Foundation is a very wealthy foundation in the Northeast that funds a lot of these groups that are, sending people to the streets. And if you visit their website, westpac.org, WESPAC, the first thing you hit with is these very earnest-looking activists carrying a banner that says, "Another world is possible." Now, because I've done a lot of work in this area, I can tell you that another world is possible is a dog whistle for communists. Mm-hmm. They don't come out and say, "Hey, look, we're for gulags, we're for collectivists, and we're for central planning." No, they say, "Another world is possible." Google that, and you will find all the communist organizations in this country, or nearly all. So you have to explain these things to people plainly.
Now, when you mentioned Black Lives Matter, I've seen videos where they go in the street and ask African American people, "What has Black Lives Matter done for you?" And the answer is nothing. They're very good at causing riots. They're very good at providing mansions for their upper level people. But in terms of what they've done for African Americans, I'd say the answer is nothing.
Oh, and worse than that, I would say the left has long been exploiting blacks in America. The radical left has. I mean, when you look at what happened when the Students for Democratic Society went into America's cities and caused those riots, the people who suffered most were actually the black people in those cities. Mm-hmm. Their businesses were destroyed. The property values were destroyed for years. And I think you're seeing the exact same thing now. There is nothing about DEI that is helpful to black people. And I will just add, one of our great colleagues at Heritage, Dr. Jay Green, has used data to demonstrate that, for example, in K through 12 schools across the country that have DEI administrative staff, it actually widens the achievement gap. It doesn't narrow it, because I think part of the problem is they're lowering expectations of black kids, and they're also diverting resources into things that are pointless and don't actually teach people anything. So, I think we just have to be really clear about what is DEI doing for anybody.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would have to say nothing. Now, traditionally, Republicans and conservatives haven't been particularly good at boycotts, at making people pay for caving to this Marxist nonsense. But now we have a situation where you look at Bud Light or you look at Target, and there are others, and it's almost like there's a little blood in the water. And Republicans and conservatives are saying, we can do this. So when we talk about what next-gen Marxism is and how to combat it, one of those ways is through boycotts, is it not?
Well, I have my own theory about this.
Okay.
And I haven't talked about it with Katie yet, so maybe she will disagree. But my own theory is that both those instances that you mentioned, Bud Light and Target, were made possible by Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, which he's now renamed X. That has opened up the internet, that has made it's made Twitter a free speech zone, where people can just say what they want without fear of being canceled, without fear of suspension. And that permitted conservatives to have the success that had been denied them for so many decades before. So I think that gives that opens a window into what else can we do to have that kind of access in social media and the media in general. Katie, do you generally overall agree with that, or no? You can disagree.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's really important. I do agree, and I do think the power of the purse is one of the most effective tools that we have. So I'm glad to see that we're finally deploying it successfully.
And it's exciting. It's exciting to see that. I mean, conservatives for the longest time just didn't want to get involved. A story I told on the show a few shows ago was that once I was at a table with a bunch of conservatives, and one of the ladies at the table was pointing out, what a horrible person a particular actress was because of all the Marxist propaganda she was pushing. And I said, well, she has a movie coming out when it comes to town. Why don't we gather all the conservatives we can find and protest outside the theater? And her response was, Mark, are you serious? That's not that's not dignified. That's the kind of stuff liberals do. We don't do that. And therein lies part of the problem, is that conservatives have jobs. They consider themselves respectable members of the community, and they don't want to turn on the news at 5 or 6 and see themselves carrying a sign. So what would your message be to conservatives who feel like getting involved in pushing against all this stuff isn't dignified?
Yeah, I have this conversation with people. Yeah, I have this conversation with people all the time because I actually just got elected as the chairman of the Fairfax County GOP, and we debate this constantly, right? So people say to me, the other side is fighting a war and we're still being polite.
Correct.
And I think it's a real dilemma for conservatives because look, the bottom line is we have principles, right? Many of us are religious. Our religious beliefs, I think, prevent us and rightly prevent us from lying about people or being cruel to people, all sorts of things which don't seem to restrain the radical left, right? So I think that immediately puts us at a disadvantage. Look, I think that we can still win this by fighting smart but staying true to our principles. I don't want to see us getting down in the mud the way they do. I don't want to see us lying about people just to score a point. But having said that, I think we need to be much smarter, much better organized, much more aggressive, and truly to recognize what's at stake. And so, again, I will just give you one small example from the book, which is, based on a conversation that I had with Riley Gaines, the very brave swimmer who's fighting for women in sports. And she said one of the most important lessons she learned was, don't use their language. She said, originally she would use language like gender transition, which is the left language. And then she realized by using that, she's buying into their ideas. And so she will not use that language because, in fact, you can't transition a person's gender. So I think having the courage to speak truth is one thing that we can all be doing. But I would just say, I think being strategic, being smart, being organized, having really comprehensive strategies to fight back, these are all the things that we need. And I tell you the truth, and I say this as the chair of our GOP, it takes a lot of manpower. All these efforts, whether it's protecting election integrity, whether it's getting articles out there and messaging, whether it's knocking on doors to inform people about what your politicians are doing. These all take manpower and woman power. So people need to volunteer and get involved.
Absolutely.
See, I think the left has an inbuilt advantage in that to them everything is political, and to us it isn't. And I don't know what you do about that, because I wouldn't want to tell conservatives, no, you must lead a life in which everything is political. We have also advantages. We have the truth on our side. They don't. They don't have truth. They don't have objective truth on their side, which is the reason why they deny that there's such a thing as objective truth. So we have to use what our advantages are. But, I remember sitting with a bunch of conservatives, and I said, well, Tom Hanks is a really leftist guy. I don't like seeing his movies. He's a very liberal politician. And people just looked at me and said, come on, Mike, he's America's dad. He's not my dad. He's a liberal. but I don't know if you can ask conservatives to turn into liberals in this sense.
You said that they don't have the truth on their side. Mike, are you telling me that men can't have periods and can't get pregnant and can't have babies and can't nurse babies?
I got to tell you, that's exactly what I'm telling you.
Okay, that's good. I see the fear. Conservatives are so afraid of being canceled. Back when Trump originally ran for president in 2016, I was at a lunch, and I was not the least bit shy of saying I was going to support Trump when the subject of politics came up. And then after, of course, no one said anything. Everybody acted like I had just, spilled my food all over the table or something. And then afterwards, a woman came up to me and she went, Mark, I'm going to vote for Trump too. And I said, why are you whispering? I'm afraid for anybody to know. And it's just, that's where they've got us. It just, nobody at that table would have been shy about saying I'm supporting Hillary Clinton, or before that, I'm supporting Barack Obama or Bill Clinton. No one would ever be ashamed to say that at a table, but people were afraid to say I'm supporting Donald Trump because they were afraid that,
it's so true. We've let them bully us on this issue. I completely agree.
Yeah, it's just and I notice how shocked liberals are when you stand up to them. I had a friend who was a doctor, and he pointed at me one day, and he said, well, the problem with you conservatives is you don't like facts. And I said, yeah, I was just kind of being funny. And I said, well, he was older than me. And I said, okay, Daddy-o, lay one of your facts on me, and we'll see if whether or not I like it. And he brought up global warming. He said, you guys are climate change deniers. And I said, I tell you what, I'm open-minded. Here's a blank sheet of paper. Here's a pen. Write down every reason you support climate change. You believe in anthropogenic global warming. And he couldn't write a single thing down. So then he comes back with, well, why do you not believe it? And this show originated 14 years ago as a show called Global Cooling Radio. So he really was asking the wrong guy that. So after I beat him over the head with facts for about 15 minutes, he said, well, you're obviously very educated on this subject, but I think if I were as educated on it as you are, I would be able to combat what you're saying. And I said, if you were as educated on it as I am, you wouldn't believe in it. But that's the kind of thing we're facing out there. You do that with anything that the Marxists hold near and dear. Just say, write down the facts. And I've done that. I call it my blank sheet of paper test. They can never write down anything. It's just like the videos we're seeing right now. All these kids yelling from the river to the sea, and independent journalists are going up and saying which river and which sea, and they don't know. And then, going to these college protests that are happening right now and saying, what's this protest all about? And they can't answer the question. So I wonder how much of this for the young people is just filling the voids, their need to belong, their need to feel like they're doing some good for the world, which they do believe they're doing in a lot of cases. So, how much of this is really them buying into all the stuff and them just wanting to be part of a group or to have friends?
Well, this is one of the things that Katie and I wrote into our book, NextGen Marxism, is that in many ways, progressive and next-gen Marxist beliefs have become the new matrix. It's no longer a counter-hegemony. It's the hegemonic narrative of our country. And our children want to get along. They don't want to lead lives of opposition, and they don't want to be the outcasts on the college campus or in high school. So they will go along with these lies that their teachers and professors have fed them. And it's incredibly hard, I tell you, as a father of three, to say, no, you cannot go along with this. It reminds me, I don't want to sound hyperbolic here, but it reminds me of being a little boy in Cuba when my family said to me, no, you cannot go along with that. We're in opposition to this, and you too are in opposition to this. And you have to be very clear in class that you're in opposition to this, to this crazy revolution. And I have to do it, and I did it. And I'm very happy that my father had us live lives that way. But it wasn't exactly a happy childhood. So I have great sympathy for this is why I say the political class has to come to the aid of the American people.
This book has been a success. I know that when it first came out a short time ago, Amazon sold out of it. So obviously people are hungry for this message. And for that reason, I always like to give my authors a chance at the end of the show to answer the question, is there anything really important that we've left out? Is there anything more you want to say to the listeners about this book or about the subject your book is written about?
Katie, you go first.
Well, I think there is a whole piece of this that we haven't had a chance to talk about today that I think is very, very important, which is that the role that's being played by our enemies abroad. It's a very significant role. There's a whole chapter on it. And I think it's important for people to understand that as well, particularly in the way they helped fuel Black Lives Matter. Many, many, many Americans, many well-intentioned Americans took part in those protests the summer of 2020. They put, the Black Lives Matter signs in their yards, or they're putting the pro-Hamas signs in their yards now. And I just think people need to understand better the degree to which they are being manipulated and used by our enemies who want to take us down.
Yeah, that was a very interesting chapter that Katie and I had. And I tell you what we left out that I wish if I were, now the book is big enough. Katie and I wrestled with the length of the book when we were writing it. But the idea that we left out that conservatives were catching on to the importance of the cultural battle in the late 90s. Pat Horitz, for example, I think it was Pat Horitz, Norman wrote, we're all Gramscians now. He wrote that line in 1996. And then I think the two things that happened, Katie and I have talked about this, is that first we had the wall coming down in 1989, and we thought that Marxism had been defeated. But we also then, 11 years later, we had 9/11, and people like Katie and me were devoting all of our attention to saving our country from Islamofascism. And we took our eye off the ball a little bit, but now we're trying to catch up again to the big threat that is coming from within. I wish I had we had fleshed that out a little bit more in the book, and at least included that quote about Pat Horitz.
Well, I'd love to have you guys back sometime and we can dive into some of the areas of the book that we didn't have time to get to today. But I think it's very important to note that what makes this book unique is the idea that you didn't just define the problem. You have a lot in this book, and we didn't have time to get into all the things that individual people can do. But you have a lot of things in there on what you can do to make a difference. I mean, again, top two questions I get, and I bet you get them a lot too, is how did we get into this? And what can I do to help us get out? And this book answers both of those questions and is already off to a very successful start. So, Katharine Gorka, Mike Gonzalez, I want to thank you both for being here. For those of you wondering, yes, that last name, Gorka, Katharine is the wife of Sebastian Gorka, another individual who does a whole lot to fight back on these issues. So I just want to say to both of you, thank you for being among the people that are fighting back. I mean, everybody is talking about all this stuff, but then nobody is doing anything about it, or very few people are doing anything about it. You two not only are doing something about it yourselves, you wrote a guidebook to other people as far as what they can do. So again, I want to thank both of you for coming on the Tea Party Power Hour. We enjoyed having you here, and you have an open invitation to come back whenever you want.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Absolutely. Have a great day, both of you.
Bye.
Thanks.
You've been listening to the Tea Party Power Hour with Mark Gillar.